So hi, my name is Louise Warrior. I'm a freelance product designer from France, lived in Hong Kong, and currently based in LA.
Hello everyone, my name is Pia Behmuaras. I'm an extended reality designer, multimedia artist, and product manager. Originally from Istanbul, Turkey, traveled all the way to the US to study psychology and art, later worked in extended reality all over the world, and I'm currently based in Barcelona, Spain.
And today we're going to present UI UX for the world, XR design that's natural to everyone. Pia and I have traveled the world and we saw how culture shapes the environment we move in. And this is vital for XR. So who here is a designer or interested in design? Awesome. The rest of you will learn a bit more about it today. So we're going to talk about design for both AR, MR, and VR, as I work more on AR projects and Pia works more on VR projects. And we're going to go through these steps: research, user flow, and finishing with testing. Today we're going to create a new feature for legacy using these steps. So Legacy is a project that me and my team have worked on. It's a cultural learning mixed reality app, which is available in early access Meta Store. And it's a game where you immerse yourself in cultural traditions via henna activities. For example, we did the dumpling folding experience you're learning with your Chinese grandpa. And the goal is for you to learn about different cultures and also deepen with your roots if it's from the country you're from. And today we're going to design for the Turkish culture, and we're going to learn how to make Turkish tea.
Awesome. So first things first, let's start with some research. It's really important to do research on the topic that you're designing about, whether it be about culture or not, and also the audience that you're going to be designing for. So today we're going to focus on Turkish tea and why it's so important to the Turkish people. So first of all, the country that drinks the most tea per capita in the world is Turkey. So we want to start by acknowledging the fact that Turkish people drink tea all day, every day, all the time. And Turkish tea has a very specific color. The color that's presented to you is called rabbit blood. And it's called rabbit blood color because apparently rabbit blood is very abundant. So when a rabbit dies, there's a lot of blood, which is a little bit graphic. But we use Turkish tea all day long, so we have two different pots to brew tea from. One is the tea itself, and then one is water, and we dilute the tea over time. And it should present this color. So you're aiming for this very specific tone of red. And in Turkish culture, when you show this color, people might think of tea. In other cultures, people might think of different things. In the US, people might think like, oh, red, like stop sign. Maybe it's passion, maybe it's anger. Maybe in China, it's also related to abundance and celebration. But we want to start looking at different languages, and one of them is the visual language of color. Another part of language is hand gestures. So how we move in the world is really shaped by our different cultures. And let's say we're pouring Turkish tea in our mixed reality experience. How do we say, okay, that's fine? How do we say, okay, stop? So you might want to go for the okay gesture, but it's actually really offensive in Turkey. So one thing to keep in mind is to look at different hand gestures that your audience might be using and see what they mean in different cultures. So in some parts of the world, even thumbs up is an offensive gesture. So when you're designing for mixed reality, whether it be an avatar that's going to be using gestures or input gestures that you're going to be having, you want to make sure that they mean the thing that you want to say in many different cultures. And then we also have unique head gestures in Turkey. So if we want to say no in Turkey, we could nod our head left and right to say no, like in the US. But more commonly, we nod our head up and we make a sound that goes. So here on the board, you're seeing different variations of no. To the left, you're seeing very disagreeing no. And then in the middle, you have a subtle disagreement. And to the very right, you have someone who's trying to be more subtle with saying no. Maybe they don't want people to understand. So you could say no just with your eyebrows in Turkey.
Next step in research is persona, which is also very important. Here we have two persona, Jian, who is half Chinese, half French, and interested in learning about Turkish culture. And he is a wheelchair user, so we must consider like mobility, movement adaptability. He is also a beginner in XR, therefore like having tutorials is very important for him. And our second persona is Aisha. She is from Turkey, always lived in the US, and she wants to learn about, she wants to reconnect with her roots. So that's why it's important to avoid stereotypes in your personas and have them like well-rounded and realistic. She is colorblind, so it's important for her to have like high contrast settings for her to go through the experience with ease. And also it's important to have two personas, because like this you can have like diverse people and users, and you can include everybody in your experience.
The next phase, and one of the arguably most fun phases, is ideation. So here's where you let your ideas run wild, but you want to keep your research handy. So we looked at how people move through space with their body, with their hands, with their face. So while we're ideating, we want to keep all of the research that we did handy and think about accessibility from the beginning. So when you're defining your problem statement, try to include your audience and also make it diversely accessible for different people. So for example, we want to reflect Turkish culture while learning how to brew Turkish tea in XR.
Next is user flow. So this is where you see the user, how we go through your experience. It's important to keep it organized, so like this, all designers and developers can go through their experience without forgetting any steps. And here is the example of like the initial setup and tutorial. For example, for Gian in the persona, who is a wheelchair user, it's important to have like enabling like seating mode or making it like your experience walkable and be able to toggle between both. You can also choose interaction method, adjust comfort settings for like high contrast, low contrast for colorblind people, and adjust UI settings. And lastly, finish with basic interaction tutorials for beginners and even experts, as like if it's the first time they go through your experience, it's important to go through your experience with ease and not to ask any questions. Next step is prototyping. So here are some tools that Pia and I both use. XR, it goes for like AR, VR, and MR. Blender for creating 3D assets. ShapeXR to lay out the room. Figma for creating assets and also the look. And Unity for creating basic interaction. And some AR tools that I use is AWALT, Niantic, Lens Studio, Effect House, and YouTube Effect Maker. Here are some tools, prototyping tools I use, and why prototyping is important and not directly coding. Well, it helps you to gather feedback. You can ask testers to go through your prototype, and it's easy to gather feedback and iterate quickly. It also saves a lot of time and resources before going to development and validate your ideas.
And next, we have the user experience design. So you've already prototyped and you've seen how things work. The advantage that we have with prototyping today is that we have a lot of different tools that can simulate things very quickly. And then once we're coming into user experience design, in order to make it culturally accessible, we want to make sure to create experiences that welcome diversity and also spark curiosity. So we don't want to alienate anyone or make them feel like they're outside. And we don't want to include stereotypes specifically. So some people think that in Turkey we ride camels. I don't know if anyone has heard of this, but in Turkey we actually use cars most of the time, so we might not want to include a camel. Here's the phase where we think about our audience and go, that might not be resonating with all people, and eliminate ideas. We also want to include things like translation options, but not rely just on translating word for word, because sometimes there are cultural references that can be missed. For example, rabbit blood. If I just throw the word rabbit blood at you, you might not know what color I'm referring to. So sometimes it's good to use pointers and indicators as well as environmental cues about what you're talking about and what the experience is pointing to. And then finally, consider your user space. So this is not just culturally, but also like physically making it accessible. Think about whether you're going to be doing a tabletop experience, a standing experience, a seated experience, whether you need a large hall, and how adaptable can it be between those different modalities. So here we have our Turkish grandma across from you at your office space. And you want to consider, like, in very different modes, like where are your users going to be interacting with this and how might that make them feel? And then coming to specific accessibility considerations, we've divided into 4. So first I'm going to talk about sensory and visual accessibility. And when it comes to sensory and visual accessibility, we want to look at aesthetics. Some cultures prefer more tidy and neat aesthetics. Some cultures prefer more maximalist aesthetics. Sometimes you just want to go between a light and a dark mode. So allowing for flexibility there is really important. And then you also want to include closed captioning. This is really key, regardless of whether your audience can hear or not. Closed captioning really helps people, whether they're new language learners, whether they can't hear for some reason at that point, whether the audio is not working. It's really going to help all of your audience be captivated and in the experience. And also, you want to include things not just like language, but also like the tea kettle bubbling in the background, or a call to prayer that you might hear in Turkey. So anything that immerses your users in that experience. Next, we have interaction and input. So first things first, hand gestures. This is really important. For elderly audiences especially, sometimes they're scared to use controllers and they would rather go with hand tracking. Some people aren't familiar with their controllers. Some people's controllers are dead for the time being. And so you want to include hand tracking options in your experiences, as well as maybe gaze tracking for more advanced users and more advanced headsets. And when you're doing gestures, when you have hand tracking, you want to consider, first of all, is this easy to do? Because sometimes the headset doesn't really recognize what you're doing. And then also you want to consider, is this going to be offensive, or is this sort of a safe gesture that can be implemented easily? Next, we have movement and navigation. So in mixed and extended reality, this is a very important part of making or breaking your experience. If you have someone with motion sensitivity and they feel nauseous in your experience, they're just going to take off the headset and that's it for them. So we want to make sure to include options that are inclusive to people with motion sensitivity, and for example, including nudge teleport versus long distance teleport versus smooth movement. And there are a lot of options that you can really give to your users to make them feel most comfortable while moving in your space. And sometimes people just want to move physically in the space. And that's what feels the most comfortable, feels the most natural, and induces the least nausea and dizziness. And then finally, we have environmental design. Now, this isn't talked about a lot when it comes to accessibility, but having a familiar environment is really key when you're designing an experience, especially including someone in a new place. You want to make sure that they feel a sense of groundedness, a sense of, I can navigate this, I'm safe here, I know what to do. So cultures have different kitchens, for example. So if our Turkish tea experience was going to be in a Turkish kitchen, you might have different utensils, different sort of setups, different hazards even, that might make people feel nervous. So we want to make the kitchen inclusive and accessible to people with different visual needs and different customs, and that's why you might want to include things like an exit option, or like where to do things, and guide people to how the things work in your environment that might not be familiar.
Next step is user interface. So the main goal here is to create one adaptable experience for all culture and needs. And a good mindset to keep throughout this experience is building flexibility in from the start and show users options rather than hiding them. And here are some tips on how to do it. So for interaction and input, for example, in some languages like German, they usually have like longer words than in English. So being able to ample the padding, have like flexibility in the text wrapping, and also assuming the text will expand is a great way to adjust the text. Then is providing multiple input and output. For example, here, the grandma is, you can see her talk, and you see the subtitles at the bottom, and you should be able to hear her, but it's all right. And having those 3 ways of like input method is a great way for everybody to be able to understand the experience if they're like more visual or more auditive. Also having like UI gaze on it, like to put 2 milliliters of tea into the glass, and having like the 2 number into the user interface is a great way to add more, to make people understand more the experience. Offering visual customization here for high contrast and low contrast in the settings is a great way for like colorblind people or people who have like low vision to go through the experience easily for them. Also having like UI layout mirroring, like right to left and left to right, is a great way because in some languages like Arabic, Urdu, Persian, and Hebrew, they read from right to left. And it's not only for the text, but also for the visual elements, like the progress bar, the navigation arrows, and the menu, is a great way for them to go through the experience with ease. And lastly, using multiple cue types, like here is for the instructions on how to put the teapot in the tea into the glass, and having like the symbols, the animation on how to do it with the text above it, and having like the audio for critical info is good to have. Even if it's like redundant, it's always good for people who have like sensory disabilities, or everybody who wants to go through the experience easily.
So we all know that human-centered design is an iterative process, and here is one of the very key moments that makes you loop and look back at your process and reiterate, and that is testing. So testing is really important when it comes to creating culturally accessible experiences and accessible experiences in general. So we want to iterate, test, and repeat the cycle as many times as we can. And we want to use things like A/B testing to test new features and ideas with real users. So not just debate within your team, should we do A, should we do B, but really put it into practice and see what your audience says. And then also test with various cultures and abilities. So that's very important. If you can make your game work, make your experience work with someone with visual disabilities, auditory disabilities, someone who's very old, someone who's very young, it's likely to work for most people, and it's also likely to produce the best results for your experience. And then you also want to refine your experience based on all your users' feedback. Maybe not every single piece of advice is going to come in, but it's really important to keep track of all the feedback that you get over time. And if you're struggling to find testers, here are some easy options. So first of all, academic institutions like universities, go to events and show your experience for free. Reach out on Discord, social media, and if you're in a time and budget pinch, you can reach out to friends and family, which likely have a diverse range of accessibility limitations and also cultures. And the core message that we want to give to you today is to think about your audience. So we want you to do your research when you're designing XR experiences about the topic that you're designing for, and also the audience that you're designing for, and how they move through space. So we want to make the experiences adaptable and audience aware. So you might know a lot about your audience, but you still want to give them the option to tailor it to their own needs. And our vision is really to build bridges between different cultures and make, the metaverse a safe place where you can have intercultural interactions that really change people's perspectives in a way that you couldn't really do in real life. So we want to build a shared spatial language that works for everyone and that allows everyone to be on the same playing field. So we encourage you all to take these principles back to your work. And we actually prepared a long list of questions for you all. So if you would like to scan the QR code in the middle, you can download those lists of questions. That's going to remind you of the various principles we talked about today. Also, if you scan the QR codes, we can connect on LinkedIn. And I'm also on Instagram as Pia, sharing some of my travel stories.
Thank you very much. And if you have any questions.
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. I'm also an XR designer, so it was great to know how can you blend UI UX, which often comes across for just a screen, and how do you put that into like an experience. So thank you for that. The question I have is, you talked about accessibility and also an experience which talks about cultures, but also is meant for people outside the culture. So how do you balance accessibility and the authenticity, that comes with the experience that you make?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would say that when you're designing for a cultural experience, you want to make sure that you do your research so that you're going to have elements that are most authentic. And this can be something like going and spending time with the people from that culture, maybe if you can, living in that culture for a little bit. If you can't, just going to, let's say, a Turkish restaurant to try the tea, see how they do it, and then try to incorporate as much as that as you can. And then your job as a designer is to make that experience accessible. So it's up to you whether you put subtitles or maybe put something in the wall that explains the thing, or maybe the avatar in the experience comes and talks to you, says like, maybe you don't know this because you're not Turkish, but like, here's how we do things. So I think that you don't have to compromise from the cultural authenticity when you're designing an experience. It's all about creating safe spaces for adaptability and making sure that everyone's on the same page by providing extra details to those who need it. But also helping those who already are familiar just to dive into the experience and have a good time.
And having in the settings also, you can add like, oh, make the experience walkable or seatable for like people who have like users who have like wheelchair users. A great way to make it more personalized for them.
Right, I think there's no reason to bring in some of the limitations that we have in physical space the same into virtual reality. Like if a kitchen top counter is not reachable for someone on a wheelchair in real life, in VR we actually have the power to just bring everything to the same level. So we got to use that superpower that we have.
Hey, thank you for the talk. It was super interesting. I got a really random specific question. It's about subtitles. So I'm creating a mixed reality project at the moment, and I'm using audio within it. And I'm wondering, like, would you put the subtitles in 3D space, like in a specific area, or would you have it like in screen space, like with your headset? I'm curious.
That's a fantastic question. I've actually designed subtitles for a multi-user experience in virtual reality. So it was really tricky to think about, does it follow your gaze? Does it come on top of the person that's speaking? Is it on top? Is it on the bottom? And finally, what I ended up with was having the person's name first, like the person who's speaking, and then what they're saying, overlaid on your experience that tracks with you, not one-to-one, but like floats with you a little bit, because it's kind of irritating if it's stuck one-to-one to your vision. But if it floats, that you can see it wherever you look, it's the most accessible. And then since it was a multi-user experience, it didn't make sense to put it below, because then you would just be looking at your feet while someone's talking to you. So we put it above the user's head. And you could also like turn it on and off during the experience, like if it's distracting or if you need it.
How do you make enabling and disabling the accessibility features more accessible? Like, how do you make a good menu where it's really easy to turn on and disable closed captioning or dark mode or stuff? Like, I find myself when I'm encountering a new menu, like, I don't necessarily know where the stuff I need is. How do you explain that to people? How do you make that easy to find?
Maybe in the onboarding process, you can ask like, oh, do you want a walkable experience, a seatable experience? How is your like comfort settings? Everything in the onboarding, and then it will already be saved. And I feel like it's a great way, like maybe like a little story on like how to do the onboarding.
Yeah, that's such a good point, though, because a lot of the times accessibility settings are an afterthought and they're hidden from your audience, and you only find them when you're like playing and messing with the menus, and then all of a sudden you have like gigantic text and you can't shrink it and you're stuck. So I say it's also important to like give people easy options to click out of those to change them. But yeah, like including in your onboarding is really key to make sure that everyone knows where they are, and also once you save it, it can remember who you are and just personalize to you, because virtual reality, it's on your face. Mixed reality is the same. It's really important that it's comfortable to you, and it's really important that it's personalized, because oftentimes you're using a personal device or you're going in through your personal username, so you want to have all of your settings adjusted to you, and you don't want to feel like you're in a foreign space when you're entering a different experience.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone.